that from the contributions of our panelists and the debate that will follow, we as a nation will be able to use the conclusion of this event to recalibrate our domestic and foreign policies for the improvement of our society and relations with other nationalities and colors. It is our hope that the lesson learned today will help to contribute to our collective sensitivities in our person-to-person relationships and treatment of other people, irrespective of color of our skin. I cannot end without a special thank you to my brother and friend, Dr. Sheikh Tijan Gadio, who dropped everything he was doing to answer our call today. I have been privileged to have known him since 2000 when he became the Senegalese foreign minister. He is a Pan-Africanist and has led in his country condemnation of these recent sad events. By answering our call at rather short notice, it shows that he is still a strong Pan-Africanist and friend of Nigeria. Thank you to other panelists who will be fully appreciated by my colleague and friend, Ambassador Segun Akinsanya. Thank you for listening to me.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, so I'm sure, Honorable Minister, as I was saying, you've had cause to argue and advance Nigeria's commitment to racial equality, social justice, and the rest of it. But here we are. With the global struggle, Nigeria does not appear to have said anything. Indeed, not only Nigeria, but Africa. How do you justify this? How do you explain this? Hello?
So great to be part of this
Honorable
forum, and I
Minister,
thank you for inviting me. It'd be invidious to start mentioning names of people on this forum, but I think we've lost our voice as a country. I think at various times in our history, our voice has been heard and respected in global affairs. I recall Prime Minister Balewa's address to the US Congress in 1960 after independence, at the invitation of President Kennedy. In the 70s, during the liberation movements, loud and clear, with purpose. And is after the liberation movement, ending with the liberation of Angola, Namibia in 1990, the Angola in 1975. The focus was on equality, non-discrimination against race, ethnicity, and so on. And we were focused on the liberation of the continent. Once the continent was liberated, I think we lost our voice because we should then have been focused on the economic emancipation of the continent, of ourselves and the rest of our peers in Africa. But unfortunately, we didn't do that. One of my very first engagements as foreign minister under Goodluck Ebele Jonathan in April 2010 was an invitation to speak at the Council of Foreign Relations. At that time, I spoke about the bright prospects for Nigeria under the new dispensation and how the negative experiences and influences of our colonial past could no longer be an excuse for after almost 50 years of independence at that time, and for our punching below our weight, and which is what this question really is speaking to. I also debunked the then common arguments being made in Nigeria and in Africa about Nigeria, the giant of Africa, arguments about our size, our huge land space population. At that time, is 150 million. Oil and gas. We were the 8th largest producer of oil and gas in the world, and so on and so forth. And the argument then was that Nigeria was so important. We were so important to the world that the world couldn't ignore us. And I debunked that. I thought that that was not the case. It was fallacious to say that. And what resonated with the audience at that time was the bold assertion that Nigeria was poised once again to do the necessary things for its rapid development, including promotion of the rule of law, which is at the heart of the discussion on race and equality, the rule of law, and focusing on the well-being of our people. That indeed is the underlying basis for government, national security, and security of lives and property, and the well-being of the people. And that we're going to focus on those things. And I talked about some of the initiatives of the new administration. It was received very well. But 10 years later, where are we? I mean, many of the things we promised have not been done. And in some ways, we've retrogressed in several areas. And I think it's really, this is what gives us a voice, credibility. It's about credibility. Balewa's address to the parliament, to the US Congress in 1960 was about credibility. At that time, it was promise. It wasn't that Nigeria had achieved anything, but Nigeria had great promise. It was going to be one of the great countries that was emerging in a new world. I think domestic policy is the fulcrum for a successful foreign policy. What happens at home directly impacts our image abroad and our voice. And I think that leads me to the point of the question. Right now, this is a very topical issue with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and others before him. It's brought race to the fore, but it's not that race was in any way diminished. I take the view, and this leads to the second point I wish to make in answering the question. I think there's undeniably a hierarchy in what I would call the central organizing feature of world politics. What do I mean? I think the world has been and is currently organized in a hierarchy of power blocks, essentially based on race, but camouflaged under economic and political blocks. Europe and the West formed the basis of what I might call a structural organ of economic relations. And I think this camouflage is what deceives us into thinking that race has diminished when it hasn't at all. And I think we should all condemn all African countries and all Africans, all citizens of the world should condemn what happened in Minneapolis and the racial discrimination and police brutality against Blacks in particular. But I don't think it matters whether you're killed by a Black man or a white man. And I think that in Africa, the lack of respect for human life is so plain that it's almost contradictory for African leaders who do not respect the lives of their own citizens, do not respect the well-being of their own citizens, to be pointing fingers at a country simply because the grounds for discrimination is color, the color of one's skin. I think that's egregious, but I think it's equally egregious for the issues of tribalism and ethnicity, which are also outlawed by our various conventions, the UN Convention on Racial Discrimination. This doesn't discriminate between racial discrimination on grounds of color and ethnicity. And I think until we address those fundamentals of dealing with our own situation through domestic policy, we can't really have a very strong and loud and effective voice in foreign policy in advocating equality for Blacks. I think it starts, as Aja Wachuku, our first foreign minister, said, it starts, charity begins at home. And I think while our voice should be heard in condemnation of such egregious actions by law enforcement against a particular ethnic group, I think we too here should look at ourselves and fashion policies to ensure that we create greater equality amongst our people.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you for your contribution. I want to now go to Senegal. Dr. Gadio, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Gadio, if you can hear me, I also want, thank you very much for joining us. We are grateful you could join us. Now, Nigeria was not the only country in Africa that was silent. I must confess that I have no idea what Senegal did and the Senegalese reaction to the killing in Minnesota. But like Nigeria, Senegal, from the days of President Senghor, have had a strong tradition of speaking up against racism and the discrimination of the Black race. Why, sir, was the continent not as aggrieved as the rest of the world? And why was our voice missing? Why was the Senegalese voice missing? Why was the African voice missing in this global struggle?
All right. Greetings to all our brothers and sisters who are in this panel. And thank you to my brother and friend, Ambassador Chinkaye, for this opportunity to have a conversation with my fellow brothers and sisters from Nigeria. Being a Pan-Africanist, I'm very comfortable talking to a panel where we discuss Nigerian issues and African issues. As it relates to your question, I think there's a lack of good communication.
No sound. Sound is though.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we have a communication problem because, yes, generally speaking, personally, I was shocked to see that the entire world was moving on this horrible assassination of George Floyd, and African countries, what I call the African street, were silent. What I did personally, and which does not mean much because we're not talking about human beings taking personal initiatives, but I did write a declaration on behalf of my Pan-Africanist commitment to all African people and people of African descent. So after that declaration, I got a great interview on Radio France International, which is like a very international medium. And we had a discussion on racism in the world and how Black people and African people are treated in the United States, in China, and in India, and in Arab countries and around the world. And after that interview, they organized a whole debate, you know, with millions of people about the call I made for African countries, all 54 African countries, to go to the United Nations and to present a resolution at the General Assembly to condemn the violence, the killings of Black people in the United States and in other countries around the world. And then we had a big debate about that. And then back home in Senegal, Vice President Macky Sall, we agreed to make a declaration. So we wrote a second declaration and he asked me to do it. And we did it and we published our declaration on behalf of the majority that is ruling Senegal today, the coalition of political parties, among which my own political party, which is a Pan-Africanist organization, a Pan-Africanist movement. So President Sall asked me also to lead a delegation to the US ambassador in US Embassy in Dakar and to make a proclamation and to read our declaration and to make a formal protest on behalf of the Senegalese people and African people against what has been done, not only to George Floyd, but what has been done for a long time since slavery and all the human rights, civil rights movement, the lynching, the killing, and or the assassination of all those African American leaders. So we did it. It did have some impact, and civil society in Senegal also. They did march, they did go to the US Embassy to present a protest. All of that has been done. But what I was really hurt about was to hear some African people saying that we have so many problems in Africa that we cannot go and solve problems in the US. So I told them, number one, first question, who told them to go to the US to solve the US problems? So they were missing the point. And then number two, how can the people in Norway, in